So, hello and welcome to the CySA study session for today, 11/30/2022. I am Orami and I will be hosting the study session. I've got 10 questions lined up for you today, and let's see how everyone does. Question number one. You need to install a device that will safeguard and manage digital keys for your organization. What hardware would you install? Is that a TPM? Is that key escrow, DKIM, or HSM? You need to install a device that will safeguard and manage digital keys for your organization. What hardware would you install? TPM, key escrow, DKIM, HSM. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-mm. All right. That would be an HSM. Mm, I don't have Discord Audible this time around, just so uh, not everyone can be talking at the same time. So I'm just kind of reading through like Professor Messer would, but I can hear you all still. No. Hmm. So an HSM will safeguard and manage digital keys and perform encryption and decryption. They also have one or more secure crypto processors installed on the hardware. HSMs can be many different sizes, right? They could be a SD card, micro SD, they could be a PCI card, or they could be a rack mount unit. A TPM is an onboard chip that is part of a boot attestation. It stores artifacts to validate that nothing has changed between boots, and it helps with the basic security of the device that it's installed on. TPMs do not have a dedicated crypto processor contained within them. DKIM is used for verifying email and allows the receiver to authenticate that an email was sent by a specific domain and authorized to be sent by the owner of the domain. Key escrow can be performed in a number of ways, including but not limited to storing keys or passwords on a device and then placing it in the security office or in a safe or another location under physical lock and key. We can think of software such as Apple's iCloud Keychain or Google's Password Manager as key escrow as well. Question number two. What kind of attack attempts to circumvent account lockout policies while attempting to gain access to any account with a common password on the system? Is this a hash the hash attack, man in the middle or on path attack, password spraying, or DDoS? What kind of attack attempts to circumvent account lockout policies while attempting to gain access to any account with a common password on the system? Pass the hash, man in the middle, on path, or password spraying, or DDoS? Uh, So this is password spraying, right? So we're going to take one password and we are going to change the username each iteration. So we might try Tom, Dick, and Harry with the password of password. Password spraying attacks are a type of brute force attack. It's a subset of brute force. That instead of attempting to guess the passwords, we are going to make one or two attempts per username, thus usually avoiding the three strikes in your locked out policy that most system administrators enforce. A pass the hash attack would be capturing the hash that is being sent to verify the login and resending it later to gain access to an account on this machine or another machine where the user has privileges. Man in the middle, or on-path attack, is when we get between the server and the client and act as a proxy of sorts. The client thinks that they have connected to the server, but in reality they have connected to us, and then we establish a connection to the server, and whatever data they send to the server, which is actually us, we can look at and see, and then we can pass that on to the server for the real response, receive that response, view everything in that response, and forward that on to the user, and they would be none the wiser. This could allow us to change data before it gets back to the user, or just snoop in on everything that's happening. We don't have to guess the encryption or break the encryption because we are one of the endpoints, and that encryption is dealt with without having to do any heavy lifting. A DDoS is a distributed denial of service attack, which is usually done by command and control systems used to issue orders to an army of infected computer, also known as bots. There are many different types of attacks that can be performed this way, but in the end, the common thread is that all the bots send data to one target and try to overwhelm its connection or hardware. So that could be hardware exhaustion, or maybe like the slow Loris attack, where um, we send a SYN and then we get a SYN ACK back, and we wait till the connection's about to time out, and then we send something. Oh wait, I'm still here. Don't close the connection. Question 3. Uh, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 recent released, and some developers in R&D have been installing it on their workstations. What would be the best method of preventing the employees from installing this new game on their work computers while still allowing them to install other software to test compatibility issues that may arise after deployment of our software to the field? Would this be a blacklist, a whitelist, AUP, MOU, NIPS, or firewall? What would be the best method of preventing the employees from installing this new game on their work computers while still allowing them to install other software to test compatibility issues that may arise after we deploy our software to the field? So we have blacklist, whitelist, AUP, MOU, NIPS, and firewall. And that is blacklisting, or blacklist. So blacklisting the new game would be the best method, because we may still need to install other programs specific to the systems that are having issues, and using a whitelist would require employees to go request a change for every program that needed to be added. Whereas a blacklist, we can just turn off this one program and not have to make change requests every day or every other day. And AUP might state that the games are not allowed on company devices, but it would not prevent employees from installing the game onto workstations. A MOU is a non-binding agreement between two parties, and this would be more likely between two companies rather than between the employees and the company. We would normally see employee handbook or AUP for an employee company relationship. A network intrusion prevention system, or NIPS, would not prevent something from being installed onto workstations, as is normally monitoring incoming connections for malicious activity. And a firewall would not prevent the employees from installing the software in the machines. It could, however, block access to the servers required to play the game online. An analyst has determined that some devices in their network have become infected with malware that is performing DDoS attacks. The analyst wants to determine what information is being sent back to the command and control servers on the internet. What is the best way to redirect this traffic to our own machine for an analysis and keep it from reaching the command and control machines? Would that be a WAF, an EDR, a firewall, a DNS sinkhole, Wireshark, or Nessus? Mhm. All right. Yeah. An analyst has determined that some devices in their network have become infected with malware that is performing DDoS attacks. The analyst wants to determine what information is being sent back to the CNC servers on the internet. What is the best way to redirect this traffic to our own machine for analysis and keep it from reaching the CNC machines? WAF, EDR, firewall, DNS sinkhole, Wireshark, or Nessus? If you guessed DNS sinkhole, you are correct. Using a DNS sinkhole to redirect the traffic away from the command and control servers and direct this to our own server that's set up to receive and analyze the traffic would be our best option in this case. A web application firewall monitors and filters HTTP traffic between a web app and the internet. Endpoint detection and response, or EDR, is a behavioral way to assess an endpoint such as a workstation. In this case, we already know which systems are infected and are more interested in what data they are sending back. Wireshark can capture the packets that are being sent, but it will not stop those packets from reaching the destination CNC servers. Nessus is a vulnerability scanner that can help identify vulnerabilities that need to be remediated, but it would not help us with analyzing this malware. A firewall could block the traffic, but it may also block anything else on that port. A trick some malware does is use a well-known port and try to blend in with other traffic. That's right. EDR is not EDM. You are reviewing logs on an FTP server and see the following log. What kind of attack is most likely taking place here? Is that an SQL injection, directory transversal, password spraying, DNS sinkhole, or buffer overflow? Can you all see the log? I tried to make it. Mhm. So you're reviewing the logs on an FTP server and see the following log. What kind of attack is most likely taking place? SQL injection, directory transversal, password spraying, DNS sinkhole, or buffer overflow? Mhm. Password spraying is the answer to this one. During a password spraying attack, an attacker will use many different usernames and test each with a common password. This is done for a couple of reasons. This attack may be difficult to detect unless you are looking for it specifically. This log file was pulled from a server with very little traffic. To see a flood of traffic in a small amount of time is very odd. Using password spraying usually means you won't cause accounts to lock out due to too many failed login attempts. SQL injection usually uses something like select star from star where username equals something or star being wildcard where it could be anything. or 1 equals 1, or any other keywords the SQL uses, such as a union or table. These attacks are usually carried out on an SQL server via the web server, right? Because the web servers are front end. And since we were reading logs from an FTP server, we can probably write this one off fairly quickly. Directory transversal attacks are usually done in the URL and would involve using syntax such as dot dot slash dot dot slash or dot dot slash slash or %2e, %2e, %2f, %2f, which would actually translate back to dot dot slash slash, because you can use percent with the hexadecimal value of a character from the ASCII table to expand out, and it may or may not be filtered. Some people would say, hey, let's make sure to filter that dot dot slash or that dot dot slash slash, but they'll leave the ASCII code in there because who does that? Someone who wants on your website does that. Any of these can be interpreted by the web app or website as move up 3 directories. Buffer overflows rely heavily on bad coding practices. These can be described as trying to put too many apples in a bucket. Programming languages that allow the programmer to dynamically allocate heap memory are usually the most prone to having this vulnerability. But just because you don't malloc your data doesn't mean that your code is completely safe from this vulnerability. An example of a function that is acutely susceptible to this attack is string copy, where the parameters that we pass it are a destination and a source. In the C programming language, if the source is larger than what the destination can hold, there will be a buffer overflow and other data will be overwritten. Since string copy does not check how much the container can hold, there are no bounds checking with string copy or string cat, but for this exam, string copy is the main one you need to keep in mind. That it is a very dangerous function. Question number 6. You are presented with the following vulnerabilities. Which vulnerability is the highest priority to remediate? Remote code execution on the database server. Information disclosure leak into web server. Firewall is configured to allow any. The Halon fire suppression system can be deployed remotely without credentials or alarms. Kernel mode drivers currently have 777 writes. A, okay, and D. So, let's see. I'm going to read it one more time. You are presented with the following vulnerabilities. Which vulnerability is the highest priority to remediate? Remote code execution on the database server. Information disclosure leak into web server. Firewall is configured to allow any. Halon fire suppression system can be deployed remotely without credentials or alarms. Or kernel mode drivers currently have 777 writes. All right. So let's see what the answer is. So, Halon fire suppression system can be deployed remotely without credentials. All of these vulnerabilities are bad, right? Any one of them could cost us a lot of money or confidential, anything in the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, availability, but only one is life threatening, which is always going to be our highest priority. Deployment of halon, which is a chemical that binds to oxygen in the atmosphere to keep it from feeding the fire, can easily kill people trapped in a room if it is deployed. Even when a fire suppression system is about to be deployed, alarms normally sound warning people to get out of the room. This stuff acts fast, and you know, if if you're in the room and that alarm goes off, you drop everything and just get out. Um, or you end up like these folks. Mm-mm. That was Resident Evil. Yeah, Resident Evil 1, the very beginning, where they're trying to kill off the T. Well, the computer's trying to kill all the people off because they're infected with the T virus. You know, kill them the first time so they can come back as zombies. Yeah, that's true. That's kind of an access control vestibule. Yes, in a way, correct. You need to analyze HTTPS traffic going between a workstation and an external website without tipping off the user. What would be our best choice to do this? Wireshark, Nessus, Proxy, Firewall, or DNS Sinkhole? You need to analyze HTTPS traffic going between a workstation and an external website without tipping off the user. What would be our best choice to do this? Wireshark, Nessus, a proxy, a firewall, or DNS sinkhole? It would be a proxy, right? Because it would allow us to step in the middle and perform a man in the middle attack, more or less. I mean, a proxy is a real thing, but what we would do is we would make the request to our proxy, and then the proxy would connect to the website. But the proxy can see all the unencrypted stuff, and the end user doesn't even know they're going through a proxy, right? Jane in HR is none the wiser of where her traffic is going. She just knows that the website does display and she can order DoorDash. She doesn't know that it's going through a proxy and that it can all be seen. The user would send us the data and we could look at it and send it on to its destination while also performing this in reverse. This would give us the ability to analyze all the traffic between the two computers. Wireshark could capture the packets for us, and we could see where they are going, but we wouldn't see the contents of the traffic due to it being encrypted with HTTPS. Nessus is a vulnerability scanner that can help identify vulnerabilities that need to be remediated, but it would not help us with analyzing this malware. A firewall could block the traffic, but it would likely show the user an error or a page cannot be displayed message. Using a DNS sinkhole to redirect the traffic away from the website servers and direct this to our own server that is set up to receive and analyze the traffic would work, but we may not know what information we would need to send back to the user to convince them they are actually connected to that website. Match the following descriptions with the correct component of the CIA triad. There's a mismatch between the MD5 checksums of a file. Nick's termination papers were left on the copier after a copy was made for HR. There's a vulnerability in the database server that would allow an attack to change the data. There's a vulnerability in the web server that could allow an attacker to knock it offline. And a backup hard drive has failed in the data center. Match the following descriptions with the correct component of the CIA triad. There's a mismatch between the MD5 checksums of a file. Nick's, Nick's termination papers were left on the copier after a copy was made for HR. Mhm. There is a vulnerability in the database server that would allow an attack to change the data. There's a vulnerability in the web server that could allow an attacker to knock it offline. A backup hard drive has failed in the data center. Hmm. So, so there's a mismatch between the MD5 checksums of a file. This is an integrity issue. A mismatch in the checksums means the file has been altered from its original state. Nick's termination papers were left on the copier after a copy was made for HR. This is a confidentiality issue. These papers are only meant for the involved parties. Being left out in the open can allow for any employee to see what is happening. There's a blind vulnerability in the database server that would allow an attacker to change the data. This is an integrity issue. While the data may not be able to be read, which could also add confidentiality to the list, changing the data would be an integrity issue. So if we can't tell that we changed it, but we check it by changing a password for someone and then we can log in, we know we changed it. We know we have an integrity breach, but we don't know if it's a confidentiality breach or we know it isn't because we can't read that file. We can't actually see that we changed the password except when we try to use it. There's a vulnerability in the web server that could allow an attacker to knock it offline. This is clearly an availability issue. Taking a web server offline would make it unavailable to the users and customers. And a backup hard drive has failed in the data center. This one can be kind of tricky. This is really an integrity issue. Since this is a backup hard drive, we have not lost any availability, but our integrity is at risk here until the drive is replaced and the backup is recreated. It's kind of a trick question. I threw a curveball in there for everyone. Question 9. Your company is located near the San Andreas fault line and it is predicted that there will be 3 large earthquakes per year, close enough to the new data center being built to cause significant damage. Each quake will likely cause around $3 million worth of damage. What kind of risk strategy is each option giving? Move somewhere where there are no earthquakes. Purchase insurance. Design the building with dampening for earthquakes. Change nothing and just hope for the best. Maybe it won't affect us. We can hope. What kind of risk strategy is each option? So, would that be stuff like mitigation, transference? Um, would it be right? So, but for each one, for A, B, C, and D, you need to say either whether it's going to be um, risk accept. All right. So let's see what it is. Move somewhere where there are no earthquakes is an example of risk avoidance. We're going to avoid the risk altogether, right? We're going to move to Oklahoma where instead of earthquakes we have tornadoes. Great. Purchase insurance. This is an example of risk transference. We are transferring the risk to the insurance company. Let's hope they don't drop our policy. We can design the building with dampening for earthquakes, and this is an example of risk mitigation. We are preparing for and lessening the short and long term effects of a threat. And changing nothing and just hoping for the best is an example of risk acceptance. We accept that the risk is $3 million 3 times a year, but in that amount of time, we're going to make $90 million between each earthquake, so that $3 million is just accepted. We'll just pay it off. We'll buy the new equipment, replace the stuff. We're all good. Question 10. You've been tasked with analyzing some files that were seized from a suspected cyber terrorist's computer. Identify what kind of analysis, static, dynamic, sandbox, reverse engineering, or fuzzing, each of the following methods are. You might use one or more of these types of analysis per section here. So we have A, you run the code in a secure environment to see what it does. B, you read the code to determine its major functionality. C, you use hex rays to decompile an odd executable file. Or D, you enter random data into input fields of a program you are running to check for odd behavior. So what we're going to take is static, dynamic, sandbox, reverse engineering, and fuzzing, and match them to these four things. You may reuse the same term, and you can match one or more to each of these. So A is you run the code in a secure environment to see what it does. Mhm. B, you read the code to determine its major functionality. C, you you use hex rays to decompile an odd executable file. You enter random data into input fields of a program you are running to check for odd behavior. So let's see what we got. You run the code in a secure environment to see what it does. This is an example of dynamic and sandbox because we are running the code, which is a dynamic way to analyze code, and the secure environment indicates that we are in a sandbox. Because we are running the code, dynamic, and using a secure environment. Sandbox, yep. Um, you read the code to determine its major functionality. This is an example of static analysis. We are looking at something, but we aren't running it. So that's not going to cause it to be dynamic. We don't necessarily have to do this in a sandbox. Um, we're not reverse engineering or fuzzing anything here. You use hex rays to decompile an odd executable file. I don't think hex rays is actually in the scope of this exam, but what it does is it can take an executable and break it down into assembly language so we can look at everything. This would be an example of reverse engineering and static because we've broken the executable back down to an assembly language. That's reverse engineering. And we can see the different steps that are going through in the code, which would be static analysis because we are looking directly at code and not executing it. We won't get the original source back doing this. It's if it was written in C++, we're never going to see that C++ code. We're going to see assembly. Um, but we can get a peek at the low-level commands and make some educated guesses as to what the program may be capable of doing. Entering random data into input fields of a program that we are running to check for odd behavior. We're running the program, which means it's dynamic, and we are fuzzing by putting random data, maybe numbers, into the name section or letters into the number section of your address to see what would happen. Sometimes by putting in random data, you can cause a program to do something that it shouldn't do, and that could be um, leaking data. It might go, oh, this isn't what I was expecting. Here's the database, you figure it out. Or it may just crash, or it may misbehave and, knock all the users offline. So that sums up our 10 questions for today. Alrighty. So I've been Orami. These are 10 homebrew questions that I've written over the past week. Hopefully you got something out of it. I tried to make it a little bit of fun with that Resident Evil clip. And that's all I have for today.